Hey there, my name's Paul, and this is Out of Neutral, a weekly vlog where we look to the Bible to get in gear and follow Jesus into the life he came to make possible. Now today I'd like you to picture a visit to the early church. Have you ever wondered what it might be like to visit one of the earliest churches? I think if you stopped in on a service, you'd likely be disappointed. In fact, I doubt you'd ever go back. By our modern standards, everything would feel a little disorganized. Might not start on time. And if the Apostle Paul was a preacher, there's no telling when it might end. The worship music would probably strike you as a little amateur. Besides that, there'd be no Sunday school, no youth group, no dedicated building, no bulletins, no PowerPoint, no sound system, and no sermon outline. You'd probably return from your visit wondering how the early church grew at all. And yet grow it did. I think the reason for the disconnect is that we often evaluate churches by their programs and their externals, whereas the power of the early church wasn't as easy to advertise. To experience the impact of the early church, you'd have to hang around longer than most people do today. But if you did, you'd see that the heart of the church was in their community life and the quality of relationships they built together. One of the windows into the early church comes through the one another commands of the New Testament. By seeing what everyday believers were called to do to one another, we get a picture of what we're called to be as a church. If you read the New Testament letters, there's an interesting way that most of them end. The writer will greet the church and then tell the believers to give each other a big kiss. In 2 Corinthians 13:12, for instance, Paul says, greet one another with a holy kiss. That would be a struggle for most Canadians. The principle, obviously, is that Christians are supposed to greet each other. The implication seems to be they were trying to keep people from gathering, give all their attention to a letter from the Apostle Paul while failing to acknowledge each other. Unfortunately, we often do this exact thing. Fellowship requires that we take time to notice one another and greet each other when we gather. Now, obviously, fellowship didn't end with a polite greeting. In Galatians 6:2, Paul urged the believers to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. The image is of people in the church carrying heavy weights. God's desire is for each of us to take a bit of each other's load. Just listening can make a huge difference. We're strengthened when we know we're not alone. We can listen, pray, help, counsel, and share. Fellowship requires that we get close enough to each other that we can help each other carry the concerns that would otherwise weigh us down. It also requires we share our burdens and not try to keep them to ourselves. Interestingly, though, the church isn't just a community where people bear one another's burdens. We also need to bear with each other. We need to put up with each other and forgive one another the sins that would spoil our unity. In Ephesians 4:2, Paul speaks of bearing with one another in love, and he urges them to do so with all humility and gentleness, with patience. Colossians 3:13, he talks of bearing with one another, and he adds, if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. People not only help us bear our burdens, sometimes they are our burdens. When different personalities come together, they can grate on one another and cause stress and tension. Fellowship requires that we put up with each other and work through our differences. Finally, there's one verse that combines one another with something that we love as Canadians, our freedom. In Galatians 5:13, it says, you were called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love, serve one another. Jesus has set us free, but there's a temptation to use our freedom for our own indulgence. We've been set free to serve one another. And fellowship requires that we do good to one another. The power of the early church wasn't in their programs or their professionalism, but it could be seen in their fellowship and the quality of their relationships. They help us to see our need to throw out our scorecards for how we often evaluate church and rethink how we engage with other believers. Be a part of the solution. Arrive early to speak to people. Stick around to talk with people. Listen to people's needs. Do what you can to help ease the burdens and serve them in love. God may give us a taste of the wonder of the early church in our generation as we do. Now that's all for this time. If today's video has helped you get out of neutral, share it with your friends and subscribe to join us on the journey.